I am Dr. Pavitra Bharadwaj. I teach at one of the prestigious colleges in Delhi University in the Department of Computer Science. So as you all would be following, we are continuing with our discussion on e-commerce today yet again. So we have been talking about all the different aspects of e-commerce in the previous lectures, and we have talked about the different phases of how e-commerce businesses can be set up, what are the important components, what are the infrastructure requirements, and in the last lecture we were talking a lot about e-payments and how e-payments can be done. We had talked about the concept of e-money, and today in the same continuity we will be talking about another very important aspect of e-commerce and e-payments which is being used these days, and that is net banking. So we all know net banking brings the convenience of banking to our doorstep, and it is basically known as e-banking and sometimes also web banking and online banking, because using the internet we can use all the facilities of which a bank would provide to us. And the good thing is that most of the banks these days also they are offering these services to their customers, so that they have less amount of traffic on the branch itself. All the more the pandemic and the social distancing which we had followed and the restrictions which we had, they have made net banking, the business of net banking proliferate multiple times. There are so many studies where we see that a large number of customers and a large number of banking users, they have shifted to the net banking or the online banking mode. So basically in this the bank provides, whenever whoever has a savings account with the bank, they can use the net banking facilities, and the bank will give you a user ID and password authorization for this, which of course the user can change. So generally the net banking or the banks which are giving this facility to the customers, to their consumers, they give two-factor authentication. So these are using user ID and password, of course, and then also these days a dynamic access code, which is the OTP which is sent to the registered mobile number. So it is not just one way in which the authorization or the authentication of the customer's identity is done by the bank, but it is two ways. And also these days CAPTCHA code is being used, so that the system can distinguish between a computer and a genuine human user. So this is very safe platform, and it allows all the banking facilities which a customer would avail at the branch, like funds transfer or fixed deposit, or all the other kinds of facilities which otherwise the customer would avail of. So this is really a great approach because it saves a lot of time and money. It provides 24/7 by 365 access, so there is no holiday, there is no bank working hours, etc. It's a great convenience to all the users, and it is like a single window service which you get, because on the same platform all the services of the bank are available, unlike you move from counter to counter in case of a physical bank. So net banking has become very popular even in case of e-commerce portals, because most of the e-commerce portals, they are providing this facility of net banking. So this is one of the other forms of e-money that is prevalent in case of e-commerce websites. Now it's very important when we are talking about payments being done, so how payments are processed in case of e-commerce websites. So we one very important term and one very important name which we hear in this context is the payment gateway. So what exactly is a payment gateway? A payment gateway is a platform which provides as an interface, or which provides as a medium between the merchant website and the bank which has issued the card to the user. Right, so we know of large number of payment gateways, like PayPal is there, BillDesk is there, HDFC payment gateway, ICICI Bank payment gateway is there. So what is this? Basically this is a way in which secure transactions can occur, and this acts like a medium or a channel through which the transaction is going to be processed in an online website. So for instance, let's look at this process also. So the light colored or the white colored arrows, they show the forward movement, that how when a user is doing some online shopping, or the user wishes to give pay some money on the merchant website. So the user will put in all the information, say the credit card information on the merchant website. This information then goes to the payment gateway, which has been taken up by the merchant. So payment gateway is to be roped in, or is to be installed, or is to be acquired by the merchant, whoever wants to accept payments through online medium or through e-money, right. So this payment gateway then transfers this data to the payment processor. So payment processor is going to process the amount, process the data, and then send it to the card association. So what are card associations? These are conglomerates which issue the cards, say for example MasterCard or Visa. So these are card associations, and these card associations then they contact the issuing bank of the from which the payment is being made. The say for example it is State Bank of India or any other bank, whichever has issued the card to the user. So when the card is issued, when the the data is received by the issuing bank, the card issuing bank, then the authorization or the authentication takes place, and the issuing bank then contacts back to the payment processor, and it informs the payment processor about the success or failure of the transaction. So whether it will give you a message like payment denied, or it will give the message that payment has been made successfully. So depending on the status of the customer or the user's card. So then the payment processor will again get back to the payment gateway, and it will again communicate this response which is coming from the card issuing bank server to the payment gateway. The payment gateway then again transfers this message to the merchant's website, and then the same message is given to the user. So payment gateways, they play a very important role. In fact, no merchant can accept any payments online if they do not have a payment gateway roped into their system. So it's very, very important. Now this payment gateway and the whole thing, basically this works based on a secure socket layer. So these transactions or whatever e-money transactions which are happening, they are happening in a very secure manner, right. So there is a secure socket layer which is placed between the HTTP and the TCP. Now this requires a little bit of knowledge of computer networks and how the protocols are formed, right. So we have different protocols which work in a computer network, and when any data transfer is happening between one computer and other computer, say for example when any data is being transferred from the user's computer to the web server or to the computer of the the e-commerce portal, right, the server of the e-commerce portal. So then there are different layers, and each layer in that model, each layer which looks at the different ways in which data will be transferred, different aspects of data transfer. So there you have two high level layers, one is the TCP layer and then you have the HTTP. So the secure socket layer, basically the SSL layer, it works between the HTTP and TCP. So HTTP basically is the hypertext transfer protocol layer, and it governs the way information is exchanged on the World Wide Web. So because when you are talking about e-commerce portals, we've already discussed, then the protocol which is working on World Wide Web is basically the HTTP and the HTTPS protocol. So the secure socket layer works between these two, and what is the function? The function is again authentication and encryption of the data. So both the aspects, that is authentication will mean that to identify or to acknowledge or to validate the identity of the user, whoever is making the transaction and whoever is receiving the money, and also when the data is being exchanged on the network, then the data should be exchanged in a very, very secure format, like in an encrypted format, so that no one can eavesdrop the data, no one can steal that data while it is being transferred. And then every person, every entity which is involved in any kind of e-commerce transaction or any kind of payment transaction, whether it is the user or it is the e-commerce system, which is the e-commerce website, they both need to have a digital secure socket layer certificate installed on them. So this SSL certificate is basically a it's basically a way to ascertain that the particular agency or the particular website which is accepting the payment is a genuine website. If this certificate is lacking, then the company or the the e-commerce site or the business house, they cannot accept it. If for a chance we say that if the user is not even having his SSL certificate, then it may work, because the user is the one who is sending the data. But the server which is receiving the data essentially needs to have the SSL certificate, otherwise they cannot obtain it. So basically the secure socket layer will take care of all the critical factors, like for example, they will talk about when you are talking about the payment gateway, so it will have to be ensured that the SSL layer is there, and the payment gateway will require some initial setup cost, right? So, and some setup cost is to be ensured. Say for example, we are talking about all these payment gateways like Citrus Pay or PayPal or BillDesk. So they will charge some initial amount for setting up or creating their interface, giving their interface to the portal, to the merchant who is going to accept the payments. Only then they will create that kind. Then it needs some time to set up, because there is some kind of programming, some kind of back-end processing which is also to happen. Then there is also a user interface which needs to be designed, because the payment gateway has to communicate with the user. It has to constantly give messages and responses. So the process that we discuss, which involved the payment gateway actually, so that entire process should be completed in 2 to 3 seconds. So if in that 2 to 3 seconds also, because we are talking about money being involved, bank account data being involved there, so therefore it's very important that the payment gateway has a user interface which is which builds trust and which builds communication and which makes the user feel secure, right? And all the payment options should be supported by whatever payment gateway you are using. Say for example, these payment gateways, they should accept payment from credit card, debit card, etc. And also these should be economically done. So if the charges for a particular type of payment are too high, so generally we see that debit card payments are less expensive, but the charges on credit card payments which are charged by the payment gateway, sometimes online payment charges, they were very high. So that kind of system should not be there. All kinds of support should be given to the customer, so that more and more payments can be done using the online or using the e-money, and after sales support should be there. So for example, when a transaction is completed, then also it's the responsibility of the payment gateway to keep the customer in loop. Sometimes the money is deducted, but the receipt is not generated. In all those cases, it is very much the responsibility of the payment gateway to provide support to the customer and to make sure that the customer's money is handled safely, and the customer's data all the more is handled very safely. So basically the secure socket layer and the payment gateway, the payment gateway is actually is in possession of this secure socket layer. It implements this secure socket layer so that all these factors are taken care of, right? So in e-payment systems, when you talk about risk, so we all know that because it involves a lot of transfer which is happening through secure and sometimes insecure networks also, because we know that people sometimes use open networks to make financial transactions, although this is time and again it has been advised that do not make any kind of transactions on an insecure or an open network. Okay, but still these kinds of risks are involved. So therefore the e-payment systems, they have certain mechanisms in place which try to mitigate the risk. So one important risk here is the card data security. So the data, the credit card or the debit card data which is being shared with the merchant, right. So, it is the payment card industry data security standard, the PCI DSS, which is required by all merchants who are accepting the e-payment. So, it is also the responsibility of the merchant to have and maintain a secure network, so that the data, the cardholder's data, has to be protected at all costs, right. So, then it also involves that the merchant should make sure that the vulnerability management programs are in place. So, because all sites or all programs, they have certain vulnerabilities, and if those vulnerabilities are identified and then leveraged by the cyber criminals, then it can create a havoc on for the user as well as for the e-commerce site. So, therefore, it is again the responsibility of all e-commerce websites to have proper vulnerability checks and have those programs installed, so that these vulnerabilities are always dealt with. Then they should all have a strong access control measure. So, it should not be that anybody can walk in through the e-commerce portal and sort of take the advantage of the system's weaknesses. And it's important that the networks are tested and monitored frequently. The users data should be mentioned, it should be secured in all forms, and there should be a constant communication with the user in case any kind of breach of security is found on account of the user also. Then all e-commerce websites, they need to have their information security policy necessarily, and they should have this policy properly displayed on the website, on their on their portal, so that the consumers are very well aware that how and in what circumstances will the e-commerce portal use the information which they are providing, right. So, that kind of security measure should always be there. So, information privacy is very, very important for e-commerce websites. There is one basic premise which says no data should be discarded. So, now actually there is a paradoxical situation in this case, because whenever any data is generated electronically, so that data is it's very easy and it's very inexpensive to keep that data, to store that data, right. And it is also important for all e-commerce portals, all e-commerce websites to keep the users data, because it's only the records of the transaction, it's only the data which is going to be used. Say for example, in future if there is any kind of dispute, so this data is the only way in which the dispute can be settled, in which evidence can be generated. But at the same time, on the user's account, the user may think that it is an invasion of his or her privacy when the company is storing their data. So, the data, the company can store users' personal sensitive data, sometimes information related to their identity, related to their preferences, related to multiple aspects of their personality are there. So, it's very important that a balanced approach is taken, but definitely all e-commerce websites, they store the transaction data, they have complete data in their database, as in who purchased what and when, what are the preferences of the users, what kind of purchases do they make. So, therefore, there is permanent storage is one feature which all e-commerce websites they have to follow. They keep the data permanently stored in their system, they can trace back to any kind of data, because accessibility and traceability of any transaction is the key. As I already discussed that for if any kind of dispute arises, then you need to trace back the footprints, or the audit trail has to be done of any transaction, which will allow to understand why and in what circumstances did the problem arise. Then there is all databases, all e-commerce portals, they have their databases in there, they have the payment systems databases, and these payment systems databases, they keep a track of all kinds of what mechanisms were used for payment. They keep a log of all the data, all the transactions, all credit card, debit card, etc., all information related to the user. So, therefore, this data, this data which is transferred, it can be transferred to the user, it can be transferred to the bank, or it can be transferred to the authorities. So, therefore, to to have this kind of balance between what the consumers want, the kind of data privacy what the consumer or the customer would want, and vis-a-vis what compels or what requires the e-commerce portal to store that data in their system. So, section 43A of the IT Act of 2000, it very clearly defines that all the practices and procedures need to be followed to protect sensitive personal data. So, any portal or any site which is accepting data from the users, they need to have a system in place so that the data of the user is protected. So, this has been categorically defined in the IT Act in the constitution of the country. So, besides this, it is also very important that the banks, they are able to settle their position. So, the bank have to manage the credit risk, right. So, the digital central bank, it enforces policies so that it guarantees any settlement issue. Say for example, if a particular bank does not is not able to settle a particular payment. So, then this can have a cascading effect, and this can lead to multiple lines of faults which can create a lot of problems. So, therefore, the central bank has to take the guarantee that all issues will be settled, and the banks will assume the credit risk from other bank. Only then this kind of payment systems can work, otherwise not. So, this is all about the payment systems and how e-payments take place, what are the risks involved, what are what kind of security mechanisms are required when e-payments are being dealt. So, we all know that the e-commerce has been proliferating like anything. It is capturing all markets, all websites, whether all business houses, whether big or small, they are trying to make a presence on the internet. But then at the same time, we also see there is a large number of threats which are plaguing this entire system, in the entire e-commerce system. So, it is a number of reasons are there, a number of problems which are found, which are encountered by people, has continuously been rising. A large number of e-commerce threats are being reported by customers, different types of frauds are being experienced by not just the customers but also the e-commerce portal. Every day in the newspapers we will get to know about some kind of cyber criminal activity which has taken place, and this is not just causing monetary loss to the business houses but also a loss in their goodwill and reputation, because if an e-commerce site is in itself is facing a loss because of any kind of threat which is occurring, then definitely the customers will also be swayed away from this kind of a site. So, there are multiple types of threats which we talk about in this segment. So, we will be looking at different types of threats in e-commerce like spoofing, we will talk about financial frauds, data theft, phishing, denial of service, distributed denial of service, bots, and we will be talking about malware. So, let us start with spoofing. So, what is spoofing basically? Spoofing is when someone or something pretends to be something else in an attempt to gain a victim's confidence, right. So, in order to get access to a system, or in order to steal data, or in order to spread malware, someone behaves like someone else. So, you basically you try to make fool of the other person while you are doing this. So, website creation and registration of a domain name is become very easy. Over the years this has become really easy, and therefore it's easy now for the illegitimate sites also to be created, and these sites, they behave like authentic websites, and then they make false claims, and they can even steal users data. So, when a website is trying to behave like another website or show like another website, and then it can make false claim on behalf of the other website, which will of course never be fulfilled, then that can lead to a loss of reputation, a loss of business for the portal, and sometimes it can even lead to the users trusting the website, the spoofing website, and putting their data, and therefore loss of data. So, thank you.